Hi everyone, so we're starting a new topic this week, which is the cells and microorganisms topic. So the first thing we're going to cover for this topic is that living things consist of cells. So cells are the units of life, and life is defined as something that can carry out fundamental processes associated with life, and we call these life processes. So these are some of the processes that you would use to define whether something is living. So they would be able to control exchanges of materials inside and outside the cell. They could take in energy and chemical elements from their surroundings, such as the food that they eat, and they were able to use that, or the sunlight converted into chemical energy that we see in photosynthesis. They're able to preserve a composition that is chemically different from that of their external environment. So they're able to, again, control the exchange of materials and preserve that composition. They're able to respond to stimuli. They're also able to reproduce themselves, and they can grow and develop. All of these life processes make something defined as living. So it's important to understand that the cell is the smallest unit of life that can exist independently. And it is the smallest thing that can fulfill all of these requirements for life. So when we are talking here about unicellular organisms, so one-cell organisms, and they've been doing this for millions of years. So the other type of organism that we can classify is multicellular organism. So we have our unicellular organism, which is a cell, one cell, whereas multicellular organisms have multiple cells that work together to create an organism. So we could have organisms that are made up of even billions or trillions of cells. So examples include humans, or mammals, or trees, or insects, anything that makes up more than one cell. So not all cells are the same. We have different cell types that have different functions. So this only really applies to multicellular organisms that contain large numbers of different types of cells. And these cells are structured differently and perform different tasks. So we can see here we've got red blood cells, which are this cell here, and then we've got white blood cells here, and they both perform different tasks during the body, but they help to make sure that the body functions properly. We have bone cells here and muscle cells, which are these long elongate cells, and we also have neurons over here as well in your brain. And these are all different types of cells that have different functions but work together to make an organism function properly. So here we have some different plant cell types. This is a cross-section of a flower stem, and you can see we've got one type of cell around the edge here, and then this is another type of cell, this is another type, and then we've got a final type in the middle. And this over here, this is a root onion tip cell, and it looks quite different compared to the cell types that we see here. So the cell theory is an idea that the fundamental units of life make up the cell theory. So all living things are composed of cells and cell products. If it's living, it's made of cells. New cells can only be formed by the division of pre-existing cells. And cells are the building blocks of life. So if we have a look at an example of a cell membrane, a cell structure, we have four main components. We have the cell membrane. Now the cell membrane encloses the fluid inside a cell. Now this fluid is called the cytoplasm, and it's made up mostly of water, but does have some proteins in it as well. Now we have the nucleus, which contains the DNA, which is really important because it controls the overall function of the cell. And these blue structures here are called membrane-bound organelles, and they have specific processes within the cell to help make certain materials like protein, for example, that are essential for the cell to function properly. So unicellular organisms are only made of one cell. So examples include bacteria or fungi. So this is a type of yeast. An amoeba is a one single-celled organism, and we have an algae over here. All these little green round structures inside the cell are called chloroplasts, and they photosynthesize. So multicellular organisms are made up of large numbers of cells that work together to ensure the survival of the organism. It's estimated that a human being has 35 trillion cells. So if you compare a human compared to larger animals, you can imagine just how many cells make up those larger animals like a blue whale, a whale shark, or an elephant. So when I talked about the structure of the cell, I talked about the nucleus. Now the nucleus contains DNA, which is known as deoxyribonucleic acid. And this can be found in a structure called chromosomes. Now cells use DNA for very important functions, like making molecules like proteins. Without proteins, the body can't function properly. They also help to divide and produce new cells. All cells contain DNA, and DNA is passed down from one generation to the next. And this term is called hereditary, where your genetic information came from your mum and your dad through their DNA. So here we can see our double-stranded DNA, which makes up the instructions for all of the processes that go on in our body. So DNA is a very long molecule. It's actually roughly 2 meters per cell, and considering we have 35 trillion cells in our body, that's a lot of DNA. So DNA actually has to be packaged and compressed to be able to fit inside a cell. So it's packaged using a protein called a histone, and that packages it into chromosomes. So here we have our DNA, which is then wrapped around histones. The histones are then compressed into what we call a loop that's then compressed even more into it. Finally, what I see is our chromosome here. And then we have multiple chromosomes inside the nucleus of a cell. Now, the cell membrane is very important for a cell because it defines a barrier between the cell and its surroundings. So all cells have cell membranes, and they help to control the movement of materials into and out of a cell. Now, the cell membrane is made of a phospholipid layer. Now, this layer is a bilayer meaning two. So there's two layers of phospholipids, which are these little matchstick looking structures here that match up into a bilayer. Now, we also have proteins that are embedded within the phospholipid bilayer, and sometimes they can move all the way through from one end to the other, or they may only be partially embedded, like here. Now, this cell membrane model is actually called the fluid mosaic model. And the reason why it's called that is, firstly, for the fluid part, the lipids and proteins that we see in the phospholipid bilayer can actually move sideways within the membrane. So they can move from here over to here, and this helps to make sure that we can control movement of materials into and out of a cell. Now, the mosaic part is the pattern of protein molecules that are embedded or attached to the phospholipid bilayer. So again, either they're embedded like this, or they're only partially attached in the one part of the layer. And depending on the location of the proteins determines the purpose of the cell membrane as well. Now, there are two types of technology that we can use to view these structures. The first one is the light microscope. So the light microscope produces a magnified image of what's being viewed. And what we're viewing is called the specimen. So here we've got some onion root tip cells, and over in this light microscope image we have some epithelial cells, which are cheek cells. So these came from a swab inside someone's mouth. And you can see the nucleus here, same with all these dark blobs inside these structures. So this is the nucleus, this is the cell membrane outside here, and again, cell membrane you can see surrounds here, and we've got the nucleus in the middle. So here we have different types of plant cells. I think this is a cross-section of a plant stem, so like the one we saw before, but you can see quite clearly the structure of the different types of cells. Over here we have frog red blood cells, which could look quite similar to ours. Again, this is the nucleus that you can see here in the middle. The other piece of technology that we can use to view microscopic processes and structures is the electron microscope. So this microscope uses a beam of electrons that sticks to the specimen and provides an image with a high degree of resolution. So this here is a picture of your skin. This is the epithelial layer on the outside, which is overlapping layers of dead skin cells that make up the hard outer layer. This is a picture of someone's eyelash, which has clearly been magnified quite significantly. And here we have a picture of an egg with a sperm that's trying to fuse with that egg to make a fertilized egg.